Did we lose Rebecca? We've got Rebecca here.
Yeah, Rebecca's
Yep,
still
perfect. Okay.
Yep.
And Justin, I might just have to move rooms again after I speak and while somebody else is.
Okay.
So if you might need to let me back in at some point, but
Okay.
I'll be back for the Q&A, of course. Yeah.
All right.
I had to I had to sign some papers at a legal office, so they're kind of moving me around.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and start the webinar and start letting people in. All right, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today for Fallingwater's webinar series. I'm just going to pause a couple minutes here at the start of our proceedings today to let people log in. So we'll begin starting in just a couple minutes. So if I can ask for your patience while we wait for all of our participants joining us from different places to sign in and be with us. So for those of you logging on to join us, we're just waiting a minute or two here as people sign in to attend the webinar with us. So we'll begin very shortly. For those of you that are just signing on, we're just waiting a minute or two here at the start as people sign in to attend the webinar with us. So we'll start in just a moment. And I can see the numbers of participants still going up. We'll just wait one more minute and then we'll get started. Well, hi everyone. My name's Justin Gunther. I'm the director here at Fallingwater, and thank you all for signing on to our webinar today. This is the first in a two-part series that will discuss our new publication, Fallingwater: Living with and in Art. I'd like to first thank Scott Perkins, who's Fallingwater's Senior Director of Preservation and Collections. He served as co-editor of the book and will help moderate today's session. Scott will lead the Q&A for all of our panelists here at the end of today's webinar. So if you have questions during today's proceedings, if you'll use the Q&A feature on your Zoom platform, enter your questions there, and then Scott will keep track of all those questions and then field them to the different speakers at the end of today's presentations. But the idea for the publication, Fallingwater: Living with and in Art, came to Scott and me a couple years ago, growing out of a desire to share stories about Fallingwater's fine and decorative art collection. which, as you'll learn, is this remarkable assemblage of decorative art and fine art from all centuries, all cultures, really fascinating collection. And by talking about these objects, we also learn a great deal about the Kaufmann family. The Kaufmanns were the family that commissioned Frank Lloyd Wright to design Fallingwater. And we also learn remarkable stories about the artists and designers that created the objects that are all through the house. And Scott and I decided to organize this book taking a thematic geographic approach. So today you'll hear from Donald Albrecht, who will talk about European influences in the collection, Charlotte Ashby on Scandinavian design, Rebecca Hagen on textiles, as well as from Glenn Adamson, who wrote beautiful foreword for the book. And then to create the stunning visuals that tie all of these stories together, Dave Bryce's photography, and you'll hear from Dave about his influences for the publication and how he photographed Fallingwater. There'll be a second installment of this webinar series. You'll hear from the remaining contributors to the book on November 13th. So please mark your calendars for November 13th for the second webinar. And during that webinar, you'll hear from James Oles on Mexico, Janine Felino on American craft, and Glenn and Dave will join us again as part of those proceedings on November 13th. If you'd like to purchase the book, I invite you to go to fallingwater.org. In the top bar navigation of our website, you'll see a shop section, which will take you to our online museum store, and you can purchase the publication there. You'll also find all kinds of other great Fallingwater product, like our Fallingwater 2026 calendar. Next year is actually Fallingwater's 90th anniversary. So we're going to have a full lineup of special events, the release of some special product, including our Fallingwater calendar, which features the photography of Dave Bryce as well. Also would like to take the chance to extend special thanks to Douglas Curran, our architecture and design editor, Jacob Lehman, assistant editor, and Charles Myers, publisher, all at Rizzoli Press, for their guidance and for making this book possible. And also special gratitude to the Anthony and Kiko Greenberg Foundation. Their generous financial support made this whole project possible. We're recording today's presentation, so you can look out for it on our YouTube channel and on our website so that you can view it again or share it out to your colleagues and to your friends. So again, as we go through the proceedings, use the Q&A feature for questions, which we'll field at the end of the presentation. But let's go ahead and get started. And we'll first hear from Glenn Adamson, who wrote the book's foreword. Glenn is a curator, writer, and historian based in New York and London. The author most recently drafted A Century of Tomorrows, published in 2024, and he's currently curator at large for the Vitra Design Museum in Germany, artistic director for Design Doha, and editor of Material Intelligence, a quarterly online journal published by the Chipstone Foundation. Glenn's current curatorial projects include, Glenn, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that name in Japanese, so do it for us.
Toshiko Takeizu.
Which is with the Isamu Noguchi Museum, and Nike Form Follows Motion for the Vitra Design Museum. So Glenn, I was blown away by how beautiful and how you captured the full essence of our publication in just a short forward. So I'm excited to hear your presentation today, and I know our audience is as well. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Justin. Indeed, I will be a little bit brief here in keeping with the spirit of the forward. So this is really just an offering of a few preparatory remarks about Fallingwater's interiors and this idea of living with art that the book so beautifully exemplifies and explores. I thought what I would do, if you go to the next slide, is begin just by putting Fallingwater and Frank Lloyd Wright's masterpiece into a little bit of context. And I suppose that the audience that we have gathered here probably does not need to be told this, but I think it's nonetheless worth saying and emphasizing that modernism has a reputation for a kind of beautiful blankness and a kind of exacting rationalism, which is actually largely undeserved. And it's easy to understand how this reputation came about. It rests on touchstones, famous projects like the Barcelona Pavilion of Van der Rohe, which you see here, which importantly, of course, was a demonstration piece, an exposition building rather than something actually to be lived in, but nonetheless has really registered in the cultural imagination ever since as a kind of apex example for modernism in its prime, and also a particular understanding of modernism, which is, as I say, rationalist, exemplifying truth to materials and what materials they are. This beautiful figured stone, also the use here of curved steel in the furniture, and the other materials in the palette that Van der Rohe often worked with, particularly glass, of course, in his famous curtain walls. And what you'll notice if you go to the Barcelona Pavilion today, unless it's been activated by an artistic installation, which they have done occasionally of late, is that it retains this kind of glorious simplicity. Again, a kind of virtuous, a virtue of negativity. So what's not there is as important as what is. It's the kind of glory of open space and therefore, by implication, open thinking. If you go to the next slide, we obviously would also associate this very much with a figure like Le Corbusier. I'm just showing you here the late construction of one of his unités d'habitation. This is the one in Berlin, and this obviously is not quite so beautifully and elegantly vacant as the Barcelona Pavilion is, but still it exemplifies a kind of rationalism. The Prouvé chairs, the built-in furnishings, this idea of a machine for living that's very closely associated with Le Corbusier, again, has really registered as a codification of what modernism was all about. However, and again, I probably don't need to say this to this audience, but this is very much the context in which we need to understand Fallingwater. In practice, modernism never or almost never had that kind of reductiveness. It was a much more encompassing and expansive phenomenon than this, in a way, stereotypical or cartoonish reputation would suggest. So if you go to the next slide, we might think about a project like Charlotte Perrion's Selection, Tradition, Creation, which she created during this extraordinary trip that she took to Japan during the period of the war, which, as you can imagine, for a French artist, at a time when Nazi Germany was allied with Japan, was no light undertaking for her. But this project really exemplifies the kind of imaginative and encompassing approach to modernism that I would argue was actually the norm rather than the exception within the movement. Perriand obviously had worked very closely with Le Corbusier as well as Pierre Jeanneret, was very interested in this idea of a kind of machine logic as applied to spaces of life. But she famously said that that the machine should adapt itself to man, not the other way around. And in this project, which amazingly was actually imaginatively set in the distant future, so hundreds and hundreds of years in the future, it's kind of almost like the 1939 World's Fair, a kind of representation of what was to come. She worked with a Japanese producer of bamboo to create the stools that you see in the foreground, for example, and also included both images drawn from fellow artists like Picasso, but also the doodles of children, sailor's doodle that she found and then blew up to a large scale of a textile. And so this is a kind of ecumenical modernism, what I've called in an essay about Charlotte Perriand, published by the Design Museum, a handmade modernism that incorporates craft into its design ethos. If you go to the next slide, you'll see another great example of this expansive and imaginative strategy on Perriand's part, the use of photography here in a more surrealist mode, but incorporating nature, which obviously is very important for Frank Lloyd Wright at Fallingwater, and seeing in the forms of nature a kind of suggestive set of contours and a material palette that can be, as it were, discovered for its formal implications. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that even Corbusier, who is so often taken as the arch machinist and the arch rationalist, also made a place within his own personal aesthetic for craft, for ceramics particularly. And so you see him there on the left in an early image with the so-called Serbian vase, which he's playfully placed on his head. And there towards the end of his life with items from his collection. Also that seashell there, I think, is a very indicative object, as if it had popped right out of a surrealist photograph by Perriand or someone else. And here I'm thinking a lot about the work of Tanya Harrod, who's written beautifully about the place that handmade ceramics and historic artifacts had in the spaces of modernist architects like Le Corbusier. And then one more example of this, if you go to the next slide, would be actually, sorry, a couple more examples. First of all, to just remind everyone of the British sort of analog to this story, the Omega Workshop, as exemplified best at Charleston, the house in Surrey, which Duncan Grant and Vanessa Bell created in company with the large circle of their acquaintance, of course, Virginia Woolf, John Maynard Keynes, Clive Bell, the critic, Roger Fry, many of whom were directly associated with the Omega Group. And so this kind of eclecticism that we see in a house like this, or if you go to the next slide, famously in Philadelphia, the Barnes Foundation, where avant-garde art is juxtaposed very strikingly with historic ironwork, with historic furniture, again with ceramics, and it suggests this kind of commonality of purpose between the self-conscious avant-garde and the anonymously made. So this is what Roger Fry and Clive Bell, particularly, who coins the term, would have referred to as significant form. So this idea that objects of many different kinds and evolving from many different intentions, whether conscious or not, might all be understood as having something to say about the modern, something to say about not just truth with regard to materials, but also with regard to the meaning that form can spontaneously generate in the receiver. Something that Barnes himself was very interested in, of course, and theorized actively. And then next slide, this would be my last comparative example, and again, quite an obvious one, Charles and Ray Ames in their case study house in Los Angeles, and their idea, which the design historian Pat Kirkham has written about beautifully, their idea of functioning decoration. So in company with their own international style house and the sort of problem-solving based plywood furniture like the famous lounge chair and ottoman that you see in the foreground, they of course are bringing in all of this vernacular material. So textiles and wood carvings and ceramics from Mexico and elsewhere in South America, for example, that they would have been collecting on their travels. So again, familiar examples for the most part, but all perhaps brought here together suggest how important this kind of ecumenical, even miscellaneous eclecticism was to the modern eye, and the fact that it was in fact typical rather than, as I say, the exception. So if we now turn to the next slide, to Fallingwater itself, I think it's first worth saying that the initial circulation of imagery of Fallingwater, and here I'm showing you a page from this important early text, A New House by Frank Lloyd Wright, published by MoMA, it actually in many ways suppressed the diversity that one would have encountered in its interiors, even in its early days. And this is one reason why the new book is so important, because it's really a corrective to this impression that we might have of Fallingwater, particularly if we haven't visited in person, that it does have, again, this kind of glorious negative space. So in particular, this spread, which actually includes the only interior view of Fallingwater, amazingly, in this book that was published about it, every other shot in the book is an exterior. And notice how unoccupied it is. The only objects that you see virtually are books and magazines, and even those are mostly laid on their side within the built-in furniture so that they almost disappear. The emphasis obviously being on the idea of the horizon, the open plan, the clarity and transparency of that curtain wall. And so you could easily mistake Fallingwater in this image for being a kind of kissing cousin to the Barcelona pavilion, and think that that's the spirit in which Frank Lloyd Wright and the Kaufmanns had realized this house. But obviously, if we go to the next slide, it's anything but that when we go today, and of course, what we're experiencing is an accumulation of objects over many years by various members of the Kaufmann family, importantly, including Edgar J. Kaufmann. And what we find is exactly the same kind of ecumenical diversity that we would experience in the case study house, for example, almost the level of kind of bricolage and creativity that you would see at Charleston, in fact. So we have historic stoneware, cobalt decorated stoneware, like the large scale jug that you see there on the left, almost functioning like a punctuation mark in the space next to the field stones. You have the folk carver Mardonia Magana, who is very typical of the type of folk or vernacular artist, or we might say outsider artist today, that was picked up by modernists, including the curators at MoMA in the 1930s, and put forward as an exemplar of significant form, to use that term of Bell's again. If we go to the next slide, we have also we also have a strategy that's remarkably similar to what we see at the Barnes Foundation. So you have those German Brettstools, board chairs around the table, for example, very folk. You have Native American ceramics. You also have, interestingly, that little spot of green is a studio pot by Gertrude and Otto Natzler. So thinking about contemporary craft, which also is finding its way into the Museum of Modern Art collection at this time. We have basketry, we have brasswork. So, many objects that don't really come into Fallingwater with any kind of pedigree. They're rather there because they seem to contribute to a certain atmosphere of aesthetic curiosity and enrichment. Next slide. Another great example of the family's interest in contemporary ceramics, and a figure that I've been very interested in myself, would be the presence of this unusually titled sculpture by Peter Voulkos called Funiculated Smog, which sort of means furrowed smog, and says something perhaps about the amazing overlapping volumes of that very dark stoneware sculpture that's for many years sort of hugged the edge of the pool, the swimming pool at Fallingwater. This is a strong connection that came again through the Museum of Modern Art, where Voulkos had an exhibition in the New Talent series in the Penthouse, so not in one of the main galleries, but in one of the subsidiary spaces at MoMA in 1960. And I assume that although this sculpture was not itself in that exhibition, that it was through that connection that the Voulkos came to MoMA. But like the little green Natzler pot, showing that Fallingwater is a space which is porous to the contemporary craft avant-garde. And next slide. That's my last slide. So if you just go back for a second, I'll just wrap up by saying that this idea of punctuating the beautiful lines and contours of Fallingwater with these objects from many different periods, many different cultures, many different materials, and in fact, many different points of view, from the putatively traditionalist to the very self-consciously avant-garde, as we see here. Again, very much the kind of palette that we see at the Barnes Foundation. Again, to me, places Fallingwater not in an unusual position or an exceptional position within the canon of modernist architecture, but actually right in its center. So that's what I'll say. And now I'll turn it over to Donald. Thanks very much.
All right, thanks so much for the introduction, Glenn. Now we'll hear from Donald Albrecht. Donald focused on the European connections at Fallingwater, and Donald creates exhibitions, books, essays that educate and entertain. Projects for public institutions such as the Library of Congress, Yale University, and the Getty Center explore a wide range of topics. These include overviews of cultural trends to in-depth profiles of visual and performing artists. He's a fellow of the American Academy in Rome. He's currently writing a biography of cultural impresario Henry Geldzahler for Cornell University Press. And we welcome Donald to talk to us about the Kaufmanns and their connections to Europe. Donald, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Could I have the first slide, the first image? Thank you. On March 28th, 1928, Edgar Kaufmann Sr. made history by placing Pittsburgh's first transatlantic telephone call from his office in the department store that bore his name to his buying agents in Paris. The call was so novel that it merited mention in the store's newsletter and received prominent coverage in the local newspaper. The call, however, was only one of many transatlantic dialogues that brought current developments in European modernism to the trendsetting store. The Kaufmanns, Edgar Sr., Lillian, and Edgar Jr., their son, were committed modernists, as evidenced in the design and wares of their eponymous department store and the interiors of their country home, Fallingwater. They used both their store and their home to enhance their role as progressive tastemakers. They did so by adopting a new approach to interior design and household furnishings, one rooted in a Viennese modernism that was decidedly contemporary in its aesthetic, but less doctrinaire than international style designs. Not only did this approach advance the Kaufmann's business ambitions and their own predilections for contemporary European design, but their interest in modernism also provided a way to define their personal identities as Jews, in contrast to the traditionalism embraced by their WASP counterparts in Pittsburgh. Next image. The Kaufmann's connection to Europe from the early 20th century through the 1950s were broad as well as deep. The senior Kaufmanns traveled to Europe for professional pursuits and pleasure. Edgar Jr., seeking to develop a career in the arts, attended Vienna's Kunstwerkeschule for 1 year in 1929, followed by 3 years in Florence, studying with Austrian artist and typographer Victor Hammer. By that time, Kaufmann's department store had buying offices in 27 cities, including Paris, Vienna, London, Berlin, Florence, and Prague. The next image. The Kaufmanns developed their store into a showcase for contemporary design. They presented temporary exhibitions of modernist furnishings that solidified their reputation as tastemakers and education-minded civic leaders. As the Kaufmanns sought to educate the store's staff and the general public with the latest modernist trends, they developed relationships with European designers and artists. They promoted with in-store exhibitions and lecture programs, as well as with commissions. They also renovated the store in modern styles. On the left, we see a design by Austrian designer living in New York, Joseph Urban, which ended up being unbuilt. On the right was the renovation that was built by Benno Jansen. Could I have the next slide? For the Kaufmanns, the interiors of Fallingwater were extensions of their modern and eclectic sensibilities. Like their store, the Kaufmann's home was a curated space. It fostered and came to represent dialogues with the modern artists and designers whose work they exhibited there. In fact, the works of several designers were showcased in both venues. This demonstrated the fluid exchange of influences between the Kaufmann's store and home. The Kaufmanns wanted to put their own signature on their living spaces. Wright concurred. This freedom positioned them as their own interior designers, working within Wright's architectural envelope. The Kaufmann's inclusion of modern European art and decorative objects at Fallingwater was signified not only their individual taste, but also their personal and professional relationships with leading European artists and designers. These transatlantic dialogues can be defined by tracing 2 axes, from Vienna to Fallingwater and from New York to Fallingwater. They served as conduits, transporting artists and designers, as well as aesthetic principles and furnishings. The next image. Now we're going to go on to the Vienna Fallingwater nexus, the first of 2 nexus that I'm going to discuss. Turn of the century Vienna was the home of a dynamic culture in all the arts. One aesthetic movement, Wiener Wohnkultur, which was established around 1910 by artists, architects, and designers Joseph Frank and Oskar Sternad, was a softened, cozy, eclectic look that drew both on historical forms and on recent design directions. As such, the Wohnkultur offered a modernist path that diverted from the cool and rather functionalist international style. The movement's furnishings were simpler and lighter than the cumbersome heavy pieces found in traditionally eclectic interiors. Its adherents valued bright colors and bold geometric patterns. They also urged people to trust their taste and design their own interiors. In the 1910s, a diaspora formed that exported Viennese modern architecture and design ideas beyond Europe. Some designers moved to the United States in the teens, taking advantage of its booming economy to realize their ideas. Then in the 1930s, others came in flight from the Nazis. The modernist Austrian style that most influenced Fallingwater was the eclectic, warm, and cozy aesthetics of the Wiener Wohnkultur, which is seen on the screen here, which they knew from friends and colleagues, as well as from Edgar Jr.'s year of study in Vienna. The aesthetic freedom offered by this aesthetic certainly appealed to the confident, style-conscious Kaufmanns. At Fallingwater, they assembled a sophisticated ensemble of art and decorative objects in which modernist European pieces, a French Art Deco molded frosted vase by René Lalique, and a brightly colored Viennese glass vase by Barbara Valvecchio, among others, presented strong visual counterparts to their wide-ranging collection of historical European designs. Can I have the next on? These included we see here in the center, these included a 15th century late medieval Austrian Bohemian sculpture of a Madonna and the infant Jesus, which was one of Lillian's prized possessions. At Fallingwater, it was situated in a specially designed niche in her bedroom, and we say that in the center, the French Art Deco molded in a frosted vase by René Lalique is on the left, and the Barbara Valvecchio is on the right. Could I have the next image? Additional connections with the store included chairs designed by Austrian designer Joseph Frank that provided keynotes of modernism in Fallingwater's interiors. Seen on the left, Edgar Jr.'s bedroom included a wood armchair by Frank that echoed the room's rectilinear architecture. The Kaufmanns were admirers of Frank's design and his approach to modernism. In addition to co-founding the Wiener Wohnkultur, Frank in the 1920s ran Vienna's Kunstgewerbeschule, the school Edgar Jr. attended later that decade. Slide 8, next slide. Thank you. The Kaufmann family also had developed a friendship with Viennese artist and typographer Victor Hammer. Admirers of Hammer's work, all three Kaufmanns promoted his career by seeking to connect him to prominent museum directors and gallerists. They also commissioned Hammer to create portraits of each of them. Portraits of Lillian bracketed the series. There was a pencil sketch of her in 1926, and in 1932, a depiction of the 43-year-old Lillian in the nude titled Vanitas that Hammer painted in Florence. In between, Hammer drew Edgar Jr.'s portrait in 1927 and painted Edgar Sr. in 1929. Now hanging in Fallingwater's dining room, which you see on the left, this portrait titled Excursion was commissioned by Lillian. The oil and tempera canvas depicts Edgar Sr. not as an executive in a suit and tie at his store, but rather as a man in casual dress, walking stick in hand, as if returning from a hike. The Kaufmanns facilitated Hammer's immigration to the United States in 1939, and he visited them often in Pittsburgh. Hammer had trained at the Vienna Academy. In 1922, he moved to Florence, where he opened the studio that Edgar Jr. attended. Hammer sharpened Edgar's eye for architecture. This was an important attribute not only for Edgar's decoration of Fallingwater, but also for his important position as a design curator at the Museum of Modern Art. I have the next image. Now we move on to the New York Fallingwater Nexus, the second of our two. Whereas Vienna was an epicenter of early 20th century modernity, New York supplanted it as an international cultural capital after the end of World War II in 1945. Manhattan Gallery, oh, I need the next image. No, sorry, go back. Yeah, Manhattan galleries were important sources for contemporary European art at Fallingwater. Now go forward. Thank you. Edgar Jr. purchased the Pablo Picasso aquatent La Famure, now located in Lillian's bedroom, from the Seidenberg Gallery, and Edgar Sr. bought Italian Marino Marini's late 1940s bronze, The Angel of the City, from Kurt Valentine. But it was Julian Levy, Manhattan's most avant-garde gallerist, who most actively interacted with the Kaufmann family. Corrado Colli, an expressionist painter who immigrated to New York in the late 1930s, showed at the Levy Gallery. Levy probably introduced Colli to the Kaufmanns. Edgar Jr. bought Colli's untitled 1948 dark-hued painting of abstracted musical instruments, seen here, that is situated above Edgar Sr.'s bedroom desk. You see the bedroom desk on the right. Edgar Jr.'s sophisticated efforts to add European art and design to Fallingwater were shaped by his connections to the Museum of Modern Art, where from 1938 through 1955, he served as in various capacities, such as competition judge, design curator, director of the Industrial Design Department, and organizer of the Good Design Department, and the Good Design Program. The latter displayed home furnishings at the museum and at Chicago's Merchandise Mart from 1950 through 1955. Could I have the next image? Because Edgar Jr., like his parents, found Wright's chairs uncomfortable and lacking the stylistic variety the Kaufmann's prize at Fallingwater, he selected diverse chairs for the bedrooms. Most of them, Edgar Jr. noted, were designed by well-known contemporaries, friends from my days at the Museum of Modern Art. To furnish his study, Edgar Jr. selected a lounge chair by Swedish designer Bruno Matheson and a wood frame chair by Danish designer Finn Juhl. Juhl designed MoMA's 1951 Good Design exhibition. Edgar Jr. purchased the same chair for the museum's collection. As part of his effort to bring high-quality European modern art to Fallingwater in the 1950s, Edgar Jr. contributed additional works with MoMA's imprimatur. Examples include a biomorphic marble sculpture titled Mediterranean No. 2 by Jean Arp, seen here on the desk, that was shown in a 1958 MoMA retrospective of the artist. Through Edgar Jr., Fallingwater showcased furnishings from the Bauhaus, the German school that MoMA considered to be the epicenter of international modernism. The MoMA-Bauhaus connection can be seen at Fallingwater in the inclusion of Edgar Jr.'s bedroom of an artwork, you said above the desk, titled Church on the Cliffs 2, hanging on the wall above Edgar's desk. It's a colorful and angled lines of washes of muted colors painted in 1953 by American-born Professor Lionel Feininger. I should also point out that Church on the Cliffs is in MoMA's collection, so that's the connection between this piece and the Museum of Modern Art. I have the next image. Looking at Fallingwater now, it is possible to see the interiors as a product of an interwoven series of connections over time and cultures, between Wright's architecture and the Kaufmann's interior design, between the Kaufmanns and the artists who created their art and furnishings, and between the products of many countries and eras. This interpretation of the house provides insights into the Kaufmann's personal approach to modernism and the role of European modernist art and decorative objects and their creators in the furnishing of Fallingwater. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donald. Next, we'll hear from Charlotte Ashby on Scandinavian influences in the collection. Charlotte is an associate lecturer in the Department of History of Art at Birkbeck, University of London, and its program director for the Graduate Certificate in the History of Art and Architecture. Her research focuses on issues of nationalism, international exchange, and modern identities in the 19th and 20th centuries, covering the areas of art, architecture, and design, especially art journals, new art, and changing cultures of display around 1900. Charlotte, we look forward to hearing about the Scandinavian influences of Fallingwater.
Thank you very much. Can I have the first slide, please? So we're going to look a little bit more detail on a particular region of Europe, Scandinavia, building on from Donald's talk. So the resonances between Scandinavian design and the design of Fallingwater are sort of surprising geographically. The family had no relationship to Scandinavia, but work incredibly well based on certain shared values that, as Glenn has said, are pervasive across modernism, but were particularly strong in the Scandinavian region because the Scandinavian design cultures, the design schools and the professionalization of design was very young there and was rooted in national revivals for the four Scandinavian nations that placed quite a lot of emphasis on vernacular culture, on those local roots. And that placed emphasis both on crafts, but also on materials and connection to place. So there are a lot of resonances then with Frank Lloyd Wright's work in America and the Kaufmann's commitment to American design, of trying to root their home, this holiday home, in the place where it is built. And it's so completely rooted in that place that it is, those of you who visited will know that, coming out from the rock, surrounded by the forest and the greenery, and with materials, the local stone being such a strong, emphatic note throughout the design. So as Donald also said, there are these strong relationships both to the Kaufmann store. So they were stocking Scandinavian design objects right from the 1920s, and also to MoMA and Edgar Jr.'s career as a design curator and journalist, promoting modern design, but also particularly Scandinavian design. So next slide, please. And alongside that maybe quite romantic and nationalist relationship to nature, there's also that very strong overlap in terms of an ethos of pragmatism, an interest in new technologies, an interest in utility and practicality that we can see across Frank Lloyd Wright's design and many of the designers that Edgar Jr. in particular champions in the 40s and 50s and later. That this romantic, tactile, sensual relationship to nature and materials doesn't preclude an interest in new technologies and a desire to find new solutions. So the slides here are sort of creating a parallel between the innovative concrete work at Fallingwater and the technological innovation that Edgar Jr. particularly admired in relation to Scandinavian design, this bent ply furniture that enabled them to use a traditional material of wood, but in a new way. And you can see the multiples of chair struts and so on being produced in this photograph. Next slide, please. And this is a quote from Kaufmann Jr., Modern Rooms of the Last 50 Years, which he curated at MoMA at the end of the 1940s. And in the longer quote, he's talking, he name checks Alvar Aalto, the Finnish designer, and Matheson, the Swedish designer, talking about modern design and modern rooms have shown a consistent trend, blending craft with industry, free curves with stricter shapes, still guided by the same principles that have prevailed ever since the earliest modern efforts: honesty of means, simplicity, clarity, likeness, unity. Throughout this long development, one American has been master of the art of arranging rooms that embody these ideals, Frank Lloyd Wright has created beautiful modern interiors from the 1890s right down to 1946. So Edgar Jr. sees a really strong resonance, the same that I experienced when I visited Fallingwater for the first time, between the ethos that emphasizes simplicity and clarity, but also this idea of practicality. Next slide, please. And these Scandinavian designs are encountered by the Kaufmanns and by Edgar in particular in the context of the international movement of design objects, particularly fairs and exhibitions that start to be a phenomenon in the, well, from the mid-19th century, but plays a crucial role in the international dissemination of modern design. So Edgar Jr. encounters Alvar Aalto's work for the first time in the Paris World's Fair of 1937. And this photograph here is an installation there that shows the Savoy vase, this wave-like watery vase that is a large version of which stands in the middle of the main living room, a sort of fulcrum between the different spaces. And you can see that Aalto has installed his vases as sculptural objects, catching the electric light from above and the natural light from the window, and set on this sort of bed of gravel to give that impression of these objects, which are mold-blown glass, but as if they were natural phenomenon. And Aalto uses nature, often foliage and artificially placed branches in his exhibition installations and in his commissioned photography of his own buildings, to always emphasize that connection between his design and the natural world and materials, that I think is very similar to the relationship between nature and planting and cut flowers. Well, not so much cut flowers, but cut branches that are such a feature at Fallingwater. Next slide. And as Donald mentioned, it is Edgar's work at MoMA and his encounters with modern design there, and his work as a curator, which overlaps a lot with the objects he acquired for Fallingwater. So he's simultaneously purchasing examples of Scandinavian design for the MoMA collection, putting things in exhibition at MoMA, disseminating them to the American public through catalogs, but also then, when he particularly likes them, buying examples for himself, for the family at Fallingwater. I also like the way this cover design with the hand emphasizes an element of Edgar Jr.'s criticism, the way he articulates the value of the designs that he celebrates, which is to do with the user experience, tactility, hand feel, the experience of using and encountering these objects. And I think that resonates also through how they're installed in Fallingwater and why certain objects are chosen. Next slide. So this is the Matheson Bentwood lounge chair that you can see in Fallingwater, but also in the catalogue for organic design, and how the bentwood form and the canvas webbing are not high status materials, but the emphasis instead is on the design itself, on the floating. You can see how the seat of the chair has a very light relationship to the foot of the chair, which itself has a sort of wave-like form, and the two waves just float one upon the other in a way that I think works on a small scale, is very similar to the way the elements of Fallingwater, the architectural design, float one above the other with these points of contact, but also with this great lightness that is a huge part of the visual appeal of the architecture as a whole, but also of these smaller objects that Edgar Jr. chooses. Next slide. And as Donald has said, this long collaboration with Finn Juhl, the Danish designer, who he employs as a the designer of Good Design exhibition from 1951. And you can just see on the sideboard some other examples of these teak serving bowls that are part sort of sculptural object and part tableware. And then in the close-up, the one example that is from Fallingwater. Next slide. And I've now got a few glass objects to show you. These are two Finnish designers, Sara Hoppea and Kai Frank. And again, these are objects that were encountered through the Milan Triennale design exhibitions, big international design exhibitions that brought designers' work all together to be compared, and they won prizes there. And they're these quite simple designs that emphasize the quality of the glass by colored glass rather than by complicated shapes, engraving, or any other kind of expensive and high status intervention. They are just the simple forms. They can be reproduced as multiples. And they don't then have that distinction between an industrial produced sort of machine design or handcraft as something that has to be sort of hand whittled from wood and never touch a machine. They exist in that in-between space of low technology mass production, with perhaps some of them more handcrafted than others, but therefore they have that quality of being affordable. In obviously Edgar Jr.'s fairly, lots of things were affordable for him. His desire for the American public to be able to choose and to choose things that could be more affordable, not completely elite design, but were still beautiful. And how they've been displayed at Fallingwater, set on those window shelves, so that sense of the color of the glass becomes really noticeable. But they're also throughout the house, those drinking glasses. Next slide. This is a very difficult object to photograph. This Aurinkopallo by Sarpaneva. You can see it on the shelf in the top corner in the window, the circle. And you can see it in close-up, but it is clear glass. And this isn't a utilitarian object at all. This is a beautiful piece of art glass, but it's a bubble of very thin glass with these strands of the viscous glass sort of still within it. And as well as being a really beautiful object, it fits with this idea of the elements in the central room at Fallingwater. With air. So we've got the hearth to the rear, and the plunge pool and the river for water, and then the forest all around for earth, and then this ball that is on the west side of the room that is sort of an encapsulation of lightness. Next slide. And then here in the dining area, we've also got this idea. I've picked this example, Jan Kvistgaard's fjord cutlery, to exemplify, even though I'm talking about Scandinavian design, that actually the nationalities of design is becoming something that's increasingly fluid at this time. So Kvistgaard is a Danish designer, but it was an American couple, the Nierenbergs, who were able to pick up this design, and through their contacts with more industrialized Germany, with the greater choice of different steel factories there, to have the design manufactured, which in Denmark it had been determined they were too complicated and there wouldn't be a big enough market. So they're then produced in Germany for an American market. And not to forget that the teak in the handles is not a native European wood, but is to do with Denmark's historic colonial ties to Asia that produced this volume of teak that is then archetypal of Danish design. But these are transnational objects, and they're finding their way now into Fallingwater as examples of Scandinavian design, but also examples of this process by which modern design has become a transnational phenomenon dependent on exhibitions, traveling objects, traveling people, traveling materials, that then find a home here with this eclectic collection of antiques and modern objects. And last slide, please. So coming back to Finn Yule, this is the 45 chair that, as Donald said, is bought for MoMA by Edgar Jr. and also bought for himself. And I'll finish with this quote, which I hope will invoke for you that catalogue cover of the hand touching the object. And he's describing the chair with the same sort of language that you might use to describe a painting, an artwork, a sculpture. In contrast to the subtle finger-tempting shapes of the arms and legs are the cross braces, little modified from square boards and round dowels. Here, joints too are more abrupt than those of the main frame. This is a perfect hierarchy of forms, forthright braces, modulated frames, inviting cushions. As they near the human being, the chair is to serve, they become quieter, softer, and more subservient. So it's that balance between practical, no-nonsense struts, and then an increasingly kind design as it touches the body of the user. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Charlotte. Next, we'll hear from Rebecca Hagen on textiles. And Rebecca started her research on textiles when she was collections manager here at Fallingwater, but now Rebecca is the Bruce Brooks Pfeiffer Director of Collections and Archives at the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation. Her published essays include Rebelling Against Convention, Wright, Klimt, and the Vienna Secession Movement, and the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation Collection, A Tool to Advance the Way We Build and Live, both published in the Frank Lloyd Wright Quarterly. Rebecca, tell us about the textiles here at Fallingwater.
Thank you, Justin. As Justin mentioned, I was lucky enough to be able to work with the collection there for almost 7 years, which was such an incredible experience and really gave me an intimate opportunity to engage with the house and the collections there. And something that surprised me, I hadn't always had an interest in textiles, but having time alone in the house, I really started appreciating the warmth that it creates in the house and started wondering more about the design motifs, the symbolism, and that really led me to diving in deep into what these meanings are. And what I found, to put it succinctly, is that they just tell a lot of personal stories of the weavers. And it sort of blew my mind that there were such rich stories and artisanship that we just, walk on every single day. So literally under our feet. But the collection at Fallingwater that the Kaufmanns collected is a really rich, diverse collection. The book was divided into geographic regions for the most part, and I was lucky enough to be able to tap into basically the whole world based on this collection. And so we have Scottish tartans and Indonesian and Uzbek ikats, Kuba cloths, kente cloths, the North African textiles I'm going to touch on more today, Indian paisleys, just literally from all over the world. But what's sort of an interesting way to think about this space is when you strip it back, it really is a very neutral design created by Wright. Between the stone and the concrete and the steel, the glass, the colors and the textures of the textiles really bring it to life. They act as signposts of space. So this is one of the first open concept living spaces, which we're so used to at this point in time. But Wright and the Kaufmanns use these textiles to really create defined spaces within that open concept. And I love Edgar Kaufmann Jr.'s quote of the textiles bringing sparkle to the house. And Wright did create a rug plan. I'm going to focus on the rugs today. He did create a plan, but the Kaufmanns pretty quickly dismissed that as a little too formal. They wanted more informality for their weekend home. And it's hard to imagine this beautiful stone floor that's waxed.
I just wanted to go to the cafe, so let's go. Thank you.
Sorry, so the wax stone floors very much look like wet stone, which brings indoor outdoor. So hard to imagine it with Wright's rug plan, which covers the entire stone floor. Next slide, Scott. I think for oh, sorry, we can go on to the next one as well. This is just a great example of all these different textiles and how they're incorporated into the open living space. When we're talking about such an iconic architectural space, I think it's important to mention that textiles really are the earliest form of architecture. They provided warmth and shelter and protection, really the most basic elements of architecture. And they simultaneously serve as these great, wonderful hand-woven works of art. So I think we could say that they're almost a perfect marriage of form and function here. But it's a great way for these design motifs, these oral histories, languages enduring after some of these marginalized communities.
Is that okay? Maybe that's all. Maybe over there. Yeah, I thought.
Glenn,
In America.
I don't know if we're able to do that. Thank you. We can go on ahead into the next one, Scott. I don't know if Glenn can hear me, but if he could mute himself, that'd be helpful. Thank you. So I again would be remiss to not mention colonialism and the impact it had on making these textiles accessible in the West. So this diverse collection the Kaufmanns have is largely non-Western. And so a lot of the textiles, and particularly the ones I'm talking about today from North Africa, do start to become available in the world's expositions, but really sort of steps up a notch with the French protectorates in North Africa and the 1925 exhibition that's in Paris. But that's when it really shifts from these textiles being functional for clothing or shelter or beds, horse blankets, to then being sold commercially to non-Western groups, non-Indigenous groups for trade as art objects, essentially. We can go to the next. And so the shift that's happening with these North African textiles in particular that I will focus on today is through that French protectorate, and the Louvre in 1917 holds their first exhibition at their museum that incorporates or juxtaposes Moroccan art with traditionally accepted fine art. So it's at this point where we start to see new perspectives on African art in Europe, and especially such a important city as Paris in terms of leaders in good taste and trends. And so that is the sort of first step to seeing these materials being accepted into the fine art world. And then Le Corbusier, who Glenn mentioned a little bit earlier, gave us a little introduction to, was the first real modern architect to incorporate them into his interiors. And so that is for the 1925 exposition of modern decorative and industrial art in Paris. And sort of a criteria for this exposition was it had to be modern, it had to be new, and sort of forward looking. And so inherently, by including these textiles, you're putting them through that lens. And modern designers and architects and sort of academics were really starting to appreciate these textiles for the hand woven quality, especially as we're getting into the machine age. The very geometric and abstract designs were really appealing. And sort of Le Corbusier was the first person to start using them. And as they make their way into Paris, into the stores, into the galleries, they really take off from there. We can go to the next one. And so the Kaufmanns first introduce these North African textiles into their home as soon as the 1920s, based on historic photographs such as this of the Hangover, which was the Kaufmanns' first residence, a cabin at what would become the Fallingwater property, a Bear Run. And you'll notice the rug on the floor, which is made by a Benny artisan. And we don't know exactly when they would have acquired these. It could have been through the department store, the many foreign buying offices. We do, even based on travel records, know that Edgar Kaufmann Sr. was in Paris almost immediately after that exposition ended. So there's a lot of different touch points for how they could have acquired these. We can go on to the next one. And then as soon as the Kaufmanns are moving into Fallingwater, the construction is completed late 1937. This is a photograph from the early 1938. The Kaufmanns essentially move a lot of those basic pieces from the hangover into their new weekend home. And of course, here you see that Benny rug that was in the living room in the previous photograph. And I should mention that the Benny tribe, along with the Zamor, who I'll also talk about today, those are the two primary tribes that created the rugs that were selected for Fallingwater by the Kaufmanns. You'll most likely would have heard of them as Berber. That was the name that was used by the different conquerors or colonizers over time, but they identify as Amazic. So I'll use that name. And again, that's the sort of Middle Atlas region of what is now Morocco. They were used in ceremony, these textiles. They were used practically. Again, each tribe had similar design motifs, but a little different meaning behind them. We can go to the next. A little bit of different style as well. So here's a bit of a close-up. It's very much that high pile, shaggy carpet that at least one of our relatives would have had. I know my grandma did. Hers wasn't quite this nice, but it has that sort of neutral, undyed field with dark abstractions and these geometric designs. And unsurprisingly, probably it was the women who largely wove these pieces, and they told the very personal stories of the weaver. They could take weeks or months to create. They're very famous for the knots, again, the Berber knots we would have heard of, to create these textiles. They're largely asymmetrical and are often designed to sort of trick you into the illusion of the design falling off the textile, continuing on into space indefinitely. The designs are really based in the life cycle, so conception, birth, and everything from there. So what you'll largely see in here is this lozenge or diamond shape, which represents an abstraction of the womb. And then if there's a dot or design inside, that often indicates conception. If it's outside of those shapes, that birth would have been given. But it's really a woman weaving her story into the textiles that she would use. Next slide. Other female shapes include things like the X-shaped chevrons. And we have male symbols like the zigzag lines, dotted lines. You can start to see them in this little bit more elaborate design here. This one is by the Zamor tribe, and they're known for that red field with bands of geometric designs with different colors, much more colorful than the Benny ones. Again, most of these are by unknown artists. Unfortunately, the artists often go unnamed, but we are able to contribute them to a specific tribe. Next slide. These very much continue to be popular today. You can say that the designs are appropriated. We often see them in sort of mainstream commercial stores, a lot of manufacturers, but these period pieces that the Kaufmanns are collecting are seen throughout the site. You can see a few examples here. And I'll just quickly mention a newer discovery on the next slide, which I learned more about after the book was written, after that research was completed, was another example of a Benny textile. And this time it's a handira, which was used for a wedding ceremony. It was part of a woman's dowry. And after the ceremony, she would be draped with her shoulders over her head with this textile, the same shaggy, woven textile that we saw earlier, but it would be covered in these little sequins as a protection against evil. And this pillow at Fallingwater, I didn't recognize it at first because it's actually the reverse. So what we're seeing is what would be on the interior of the textile when it's wrapped around you without that high pile and it's sort of that flat weave kilim design. So research continues, but I hope that after hearing more about these textiles, you have a new level of curiosity that I came to them with, And the next time you're at Fallingwater, look down, not just around you, to appreciate the designs that are under your feet as well.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And last, we'll hear from Dave Bryce. Dave is a creative and detail-oriented photographer with over a decade of experience in architectural and interior design photography. Skilled in leveraging advanced camera techniques, lighting, and post-production, he captures the essence of structures and spaces. He's passionate about collaborating with clients to bring everyone's vision to life through stunning imagery, both for artistic and commercial purposes. And Dave, we were so blown away by the way you captured Fallingwater, and looking forward to hearing about your process with us today. So Dave, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Justin. Taking a picture is easy. Almost anyone can do it. Grab a camera, pull out your phone, point, and click. It's second nature in our world of instant snapshots. But capturing a unique, awe-inspiring image, one that stops a viewer mid-scroll and keeps them from flipping the page, creating an image that fills you with emotions or inspires you is no easy task. Creating a photograph that stirs emotions, especially of an iconic place like Fallingwater, comes with its own set of challenges. It's not just about snapping a picture that has been taken by hundreds, if not thousands of people. It's about seeing a picture, it's about feeling the moment and translating that into something lasting. Fallingwater, with its seamless blend of architecture and nature, doesn't give up its secrets easily. Every situation and subject brings unique photographic hurdles. A crowded tourist spot might mean waiting for a clear shot. A cloudy day might hide the light you need. Over the years, I've learned that photographing Fallingwater is as much about preparation and persistence as it is about creativity. Today, I'd like to share part of my recipe for capturing this remarkable place. These ingredients have guided me through countless photo shoots. Patience. Patience is the silent backbone of creativity, a quiet guide that's easy to underestimate. Be still, sit, and observe. Absorb your surroundings, the rustle of leaves, the damp scent of moss, the play of light and shadow across stone, your own feelings and thoughts as you settle into the space. It's about grounding yourself in the moment before you ever lift the camera. Let time pass without rushing to snap photos. Patience isn't just waiting. It's trusting the process, believing that the right moment will come if you give it space to unfold. I've spent hours at Fallingwater doing just that. Sitting on a rock by the stream, listening to the waterfall, letting the rhythm of the place sink in. It's meditative, and it shifts how you see your surroundings. It's about noticing details and resisting the urge to rush. The way the shadow creeps across the wall as the sun moves, and the faint mist that lingers after a rain. That takes time, practice, and discipline, qualities that don't come naturally in a world obsessed with speed. But at Fallingwater, rushing gets you nowhere. Patience means waiting, sometimes minutes, sometimes hours, even days, for the sun's rays to streak through the trees, for the fog to roll through the valley, or for the weather to shift in your favor. It's what stops you from settling for okay and drives you towards wow, a truly inspiring image that captures the soul of the space. Early in my Fallingwater career, I became obsessed with this composition. I love the lines and the points of interest and how it gives a view outside the guest house. I tried photographing this area several different ways, and after a few shots from ground level, I realized that I needed to be much higher and further back. So I placed the camera on the wall along the walkway, and I was able to get far enough back from the scene to capture all the elements that I wanted to. Another key ingredient in my process is anticipation. It's like a radar for creativity, a muscle that strengthens with use, becoming a reliable tool over time. It's not guesswork. It's calculated. honed by experience and attention. Anticipation sharpens your focus, letting you craft a strong composition before the moment arrives. It's about knowing your subject, how the light falls on it, how the weather changes it, and planning accordingly. At Fallingwater, that might mean predicting how the morning sun will hit the cantilevered terraces or how the interior of the house will interact with the light. From the day I started photographing Fallingwater, I dreamed of capturing it after a heavy snowfall. I waited over a year for the chance, checking forecast, picturing snow-laden trees framing the house. And one winter afternoon, the forecast shifted abruptly, from a slight chance of snow to warnings of up to 8 inches overnight. The storm was set to begin around midnight, so I sprang into action. I contacted the security team, letting them know that I'd arrive before sunrise. Driving in a snowstorm wasn't an ideal option, and with little time to find a place to stay, I decided to head out that evening. I packed my cold weather hiking gear, including my Sub-Zero sleeping bag, and drove to a parking lot up the road from Fallingwater. I arrived just before midnight, bundled up, and went to sleep. When my alarm went off at 5 a.m., over 6 inches of fresh snow blanketed the ground. The world was silent and pristine. Anticipating that snowy weather led to images I dreamed of for a very long time. By tracking details, like the weather, the time of day, and the sun's path, you can anticipate what's coming. It's a dance between planning and waiting, and Fallingwater rewards those who master it. Patience and anticipation work together. When you predict how sun rays will streak through the trees or a window at a certain moment, you have to wait for it to happen. And I've spent hours in the living room watching the light creep across the walls, knowing that at a certain time, it'll hit just right. And then I'd wait, camera ready, for that exact moment. But sometimes you can't predict what's next. That's when emotions take over and guide you. These moments strike fast and unexpectedly. When they do, you drop everything and you seize them before they slip away. One unforgettable moment came during a torrential downpour while photographing the exterior. Rain was expected in the forecast, and I was ready, but not for its intensity. While shooting the plunge pool and stairs, a light drizzle turned into an intense downpour. Sheets of rain fell from the sky, forcing me to quickly take cover under the bridge. As I dried my gear and cursed the weather forecast, I noticed how the rain flowed over the mother and child sculpture at the pool's edge, streaming down and dripping off in rhythmic drops. It was mesmerizing. Nature and art blending together. I immediately abandoned all other thoughts and focused on finding a composition. That moment, wet, chaotic, and alive, became a powerful image, and I'm grateful that I was there to witness it. The final ingredient is perspective. Perspective is a powerful tool. It shapes how viewers see a scene and how I tell the story of my subject. Finding unique perspectives isn't easy. I almost never just set up my camera and shoot. Instead, I'll move around the subject, exploring it from all sides, 360 degrees if possible. I'll crouch low, climb high, step back, lean in, anything to see it anew. I'll walk around it until it's out of sight or I can go no further, and then circle it from a distance, slowly closing in. This reveals angles I'd missed if I'd settled too soon. At Fallingwater, that might mean spotting how the house nestles into the hillside afar or how the trees frame it from a distance. When I can, I take to the air. Using a drone, helicopter, or plane opens up striking perspectives. From above, Fallingwater's geometry comes alive. Cantilevers jutting out over the water, rooftops blending with treetops. These aerial shots show a side of Fallingwater most of us never get to see. Exploring perspectives also uncovers abstract and detailed shots. Fallingwater's lines and shapes grab your attention. They're everywhere you look. The sharp edge of a staircase, the curve of a walkway, and the grid of a window pane against the stone. I spent hours chasing these details, finding compositions within compositions. Many of the images in this book come from an in situ perspective, placing the camera low where life happens. For example, setting it on the floor in the living room mimics sitting low in the chairs or sofa. Most people walk through snapping photos from eye level and miss this lived-in view. The way the furniture frames the fireplace or the view stretches out to the trees. It's intimate, like you're part of the space. The art collection inside and around Fallingwater is extraordinary. Sculptures, paintings, furnishings. Each piece deepens the harmony of architecture and nature that makes this place so special. It's not just a house. It's a living gallery. A conversation between human craft and the wild world around it. When you visit Fallingwater, take your time. Move slowly. Pause and soak in every moment. Explore it from all angles and watch how the light shifts through the day and how the house and the art dance with it. Listen to the water cascading over the falls, the birds calling, the chipmunks chirping, and the insects humming. Breathe in the fresh air and savor being surrounded by nature. Fallingwater isn't a place to rush through. It's a place to feel, a place to see, and to carry with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dave. If I can ask all of the panelists to come back on the screen with us and join us for the Q&A. Before we dive into the Q&A, we'll take about 5-10 minutes for questions, but just wanted to extend Fallingwater's thanks to all of you for joining us for the webinar today. You helped bring the book to life for everyone in attendance this afternoon, so thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. So Scott, I'll turn it over to you for questions.
Great. I was making notes while everybody was talking, and it was interesting how most of the speakers had some sort of connection to one of the senses. Being able to talk about how things felt, and being a historic house and a historic house museum where we tell every visitor not to touch. I just was wondering how you felt about that kind of missing connection between the object and the viewer. Who wants to start? Charlotte?
Yeah. Hi. Well, yeah, we were really lucky that we got shown around without the crowds, but we still couldn't like roll around on things. But what I would like to bring up is that Edgar Jr.'s mission to introduce all of these objects to the American public was done often through text and photographs as well. So his articles for Interior Magazine on Finn Yule, he's trying to find the words and the photographic images in black and white often, but to try and capture. And I think that's what that graphic design for the organic design catalog with the hand was doing. That there were many people who didn't get to touch and meet these objects in any way other than text and image. And that design criticism, design journalism, and the whole industry of trying to educate people about design used images and text to do that job.
Any other thoughts, Glenn?
Well, I'm just thinking, Scott, it's a great question. And of course, it's one that has disciplinary implications because, it makes me think about Clement Greenberg's theory of opticality as applied to painting. There's a great book by Caroline Jones about it that's titled Eyesight Alone, in fact. And of course, the genres that are oriented towards visual consumption are precisely those that thrive in a period of artistic mediation, widespread reproduction in magazines and so on. And architecture is in a kind of funny space in between as a design because, of course, people couldn't actually see Fallingwater for the first decade of its existence unless they were friends of the Kaufmanns. And so it was consumed entirely through photographs, as Charlotte says. And yet, obviously, it's intended to be experienced in this tactile way. So it has this kind of liminal relationship to the senses in a way that arguably painting and sculpture don't. And you can make the same argument for craft. So thinking about the hierarchy of the senses that's been inherited from previous generations in relation to the hierarchy of the genres or the hierarchy of the disciplines that we know organized modernism. That's quite a fascinating topic, and Fallingwater seems like a great kind of case study in those dynamics.
I will also jump in as sort of the collections manager perspective. What I think is really beautiful about many public sites that are Wright designs is there aren't stanchions, so it's less of that traditional historic house museum, and you're meant to experience it as the Kaufmanns would have, as their guests would have, being able to get a little bit more intimate within the space. And I know that still doesn't mean that we can be picking up objects or interacting it to the degree that we might want to, but I think we're really special sites in that regard, that there is a heightened level of engagement with the space itself.
Great. Most of the Q&A was comments, not questions. So I'm going to twist one of these into a question for Donald, because there was a question about the relationship the Kaufmanns had with furnishing their house through their connections at the department store. And you touched on that a little bit, of them having overseas offices, but clearly when you have a city block-sized department store, you've got access to the latest things.
Yes, and at that point, and if this is answering the question, I think, at that point in time, unlike today, department stores were major tastemakers. People went to department stores to see new ideas, and Kaufmann's was certainly no exception. I was raised in Chicago, and so I remember going to Marshall Fields to see the so-called trend house, where objects were periodically changed. And this was typical of department stores. It's not true anymore. Department stores don't have the kind of magnetism that they had during the Fallingwater era. Sort of ended, I think, in the 50s or 60s with the mall versus the downtown store, which was more compressed. But definitely, Macy's at that time, other, Lord and Taylor, they were all really sort of civic citizens in their own way, in promoting style, etc.
Great. One other question I had here was to Dave. What's your favorite part of the house? I mean, you kind of got to crawl over and under it and around it, and every season, every time of day. Was there one photo that you kept going back to try to capture?
Great question. I think it's really easy for everyone to go to the overlook to capture that view, because you get the whole house, you get the waterfall, it encompasses so much of what we know about Fallingwater. To me, it took several times visiting I had to force myself not to go down there and take a picture. Because to get really great light, you only have a certain amount of time. And I think your gut instinct is to go down there and capture the overall look. I think some of my favorite shots of the house are very tight details, like stonework, window frames, even the waterfall up close. If it's raining, how the water is shed from the house is a really interesting way to see details that you would never expect. I love looking at things closer up than I do trying to capture like the big wide view of everything. So I can't say I necessarily have a favorite place. I really do love the guest house, the outside of the guest house where the pool is. I think that's a really beautiful area. But yeah, I mean, focus on the details. Look closer, because there's a lot of really amazing things that can come out if you just take some time to look instead of trying to just go stare at the whole house at once.
If I could just say, I actually found that it's difficult to look at the details the first time you go to Fallingwater.
Yeah.
The architecture is so dominant and overwhelming in many ways that it took me the second or third time to begin to look at the details. And once you do, then you see how they work together. But that takes a little bit of kind of an iterative process.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that once you do start seeing the details, you can train your eye, and then they just start showing up everywhere, and
Right. Yes,
grabbing your
that is
attention.
true.
But you're right. The first visit, you are overwhelmed, and you
Yeah.
can't focus
For
on
the
them.
second and third visit, you can't not see the details.
Right. It's a good point.
Good question. Maybe start with Glenn for this one. We know Edgar Jr.'s, had this wonderful curatorial eye. Is there any designer that you think is missing from the house that should be here? I always
yeah.
look at the fact that they never had an Eames chair at Fallingwater.
I was just thinking the Eames would be a great example of that. First, let me just piggyback on the previous question to say that there's an interesting thing there about time. So there's the experience that we might have visiting it once or twice. But one of the things that really distinguishes Wright as an architect is that his buildings are slow. So I can imagine that the Kaufmanns were probably discovering things about Fallingwater for years as they were living in them. And even if you go to the Guggenheim, which is a relatively unpopulated space, of course gets repopulated by the curators, you see different things every time you go. So, right down to the railings, or, the way that the proportions of the bathroom door, whatever it is. So, but in terms of designers that are missing, I mean, I suppose one thing that we probably should acknowledge is that ethnicity shows up in Fallingwater in quite a period specific way, if I could put it that way. And so the way that we experience, Native American culture or African American culture in Fallingwater is highly partial. And in many ways, Adamson, particularly in the case of African American designers. So I would say that's obviously a glaring omission, although obviously nothing particular to Fallingwater in distinction to its peer institutions or peer venues of its time. I think the other thing that I would say is that although I did highlight the Matzler's Volkus, I'm a little surprised that there isn't actually more studio craft in the house. I think about the amazing program in textiles that Mona was running under Greta Daniels at the time. And I'm a little surprised that there maybe wasn't a little bit more engagement, thinking about that great talk we just heard about textiles. I'm a little surprised that there wasn't a bit more of a kind of full engagement of the studio craft world at the time.
Great. One more question. We'll take a 180 here for Charlotte. What do you think Edgar would think of IKEA?
I think
The
he would
question you were dreading. Yeah.
No, I think he would probably approve of it in general, because of this idea of affordable design. And with the huge IKEA list, there's a whole range from like very, very cheap, fairly low craft, low durability design up all the way through. And some of even the more sort of twee designs kind of fit with some of those Viennese images of being sort of colorful and cottagey. So yeah, I don't think he would necessarily choose to buy his own stuff there, but the principle of a cheap, affordable manufacturer of reasonable design, these kinds of loose phrases, affordable, reasonable, utilitarian design for everybody else, I think he would be fine with.
Great. Justin, do you have any questions for the group? You could be our last question.
No, I think we're past our time, so I'm gonna go close us down. But again, thank everyone for
You're very welcome.
enlightening, fascinating, actually beautiful presentations on all levels, visually and through your comments. So thank you all for your participation. And just to remind everyone that we did record today, so it'll be available on our website and on our YouTube channel. So please share it out, and please join us for the next round on November 13th. So thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you.